Bas, welcome back to the Zero Cafe. And glad to have you back because it basically means that your book was a really big success.
Thanks, Guido.
So that's why you're back. And now you're going to do an English launch from the book. So that's what we are going to talk about. But before we do that, of course, we'd like to introduce you to our English audience as well. So what can you tell us about your background? Why are you the person that is writing this book?
Yes, thank you, Guido. Why am I the person that writing this book? My career started off in the online influence business. I had a company and it was in the kitchen industry, and this grew to a very successful business, which I could sell in 2016. And afterwards, I get in touch with Dr. Cialdini, and I became one of his 19 certified trainers in the world. And actually, last week they said goodbye to a few trainers, so now there are only 14 certified trainers from him in the world, which I am one of them. I'm also afterwards trained by BJ Fogg, the man who invented the term behavior design. So I think a combination of knowledge and practical proven applicability makes me the guy that wants
that makes you the guy. But to be fair, you have a co-writer for this book. It's not only you. Yours couldn't be here today, but can you give us a short introduction of yours background?
Yes, yours, of course, just as important. I am. Yours is a psychologist, and he has a 20-year experience in applying proven behavioral science for better online results. And he did this for big brands like KLM, Coca-Cola, ING Bank, and many more. So he has a great track record, and he has an amazing set of knowledge and skills.
Yeah. So it's a great combination, if I may put it like that. So you're more the theory, and yours is more the practical side, the practical experience, or?
I think we're both very practical and also have a theoretical foundation, only from a different perspective. Yours worked a lot for the bigger brands and set up campaigns, and I was more like an entrepreneur and made it happen in my own company.
Okay, fair enough. And now you're writing a book about online influence, and I think you already had a nice quote for that. But as many people might think, okay, but don't we already have books on on online influence? So why would we need another book? And maybe let's start off with the quote you got as a result of the previous podcast that we did. Someone being skeptical about this.
Yeah, that's a great story. I got a LinkedIn message a week ago from a CRO specialist from Allianz, and he sent me a really cool case they did. So I reached out to him, and we spoke on the phone, and he told me, I listened to your podcast, Guido, so it's 100% fair. You won this amazing award.
Thank you.
A few weeks ago. So again, my congratulations. But he reached out with a really cool A/B test, and so we start talking. And he told me he listened to your podcast, and then he was quite skeptical. He thought, well, there are so many books, and I read books from Kahneman, and I read the books from Cialdini. What is more out there? But because he's such a fan of the field of work, he just ordered the book. And when he starts reading, he told me, he said, I was done completely. In one rush, I read through the book because it read really easy and it was new stuff. And the coolest part was when he came back to Allianz, they had a challenge to upgrade the number of reviews. So he directly applied our suggestions, and the first A/B test, they was directly successful, and they had an increase in reviews from 28.45%. So that's a nice story because I can get the skeptical side. And what we wanted to do, we want not to prove the science again. There's a lot of books out there who prove the science behind our behavior. So we come from a perspective, yeah, we know there's science out there. For people who never heard of the science, we shortly explain it. And then we make the statement, okay, assume this is the truth, because this is not our good ideas. It's not the good ideas of people who wrote books about this. This is built on more than 100 years of research around the globe. Only we want to make it practical. And I think that's the big difference from our book. It's a complete practical guide how you can upgrade your online results. Based on the BJ Fogg model. And I think we are the first one in the world who use this model in a book and translate it to online and give the reader design principles for each of the axes of the BJ Fogg model.
Okay, and so it contains BJ Fogg. It contains a bit of Cialdini. It contains a bit of Kahneman. But you also try to apply this to a practical standpoint. So the intended audience seems to be a bit different than maybe those books are. I mean, Cialdini wrote his first book, was it 1982 or 3?
1984, yes.
84. It was a long time ago. There was no online. I assume a lot of those examples in the books that you have in the English version are still also applied to online. I mean, I haven't read the English version yet.
Yeah. But you read the Dutch version, and it's a translation with a minor change in some examples, because in the Dutch version we of course use some Dutch companies, which we changed to more international companies. But the theory and our advice stays the same. That's also, of course, one part of. Sorry, Guido. Yes.
But who's your intended audience for this? It's very practical. Is it digital marketeers that the audience, that the general audience for that?
I would say everybody who wants to increase their online results is our audience, and that could be from an online marketeer who's really doing the work, or a copywriter, or a UX designer, also a manager, or even a chief marketing officer could be the audience, and from a perspective to guide their people or to be creative designing campaigns. So I would argue our book is fit for anybody who wants to increase their online results.
Okay, but so it is mainly intended for online users. Would you say it's also? Does it mean it's not applicable to offline, all the examples, or would it also be just as well? It just happens to be very being applied to online.
No, really good question, Guido. And actually, I would say everybody could benefit from reading our book. Of course, we translate the theory to online, but if with a slight imagination, you could translate it to a sales conversation, to talking with your friends who you want to persuade of believing something or doing something. So it's applicable all out your life, I would say. Only we translate the theory into online examples. But behavior design, behavioral science, and it's based on how our decisions and behaviors comes to life. So this does not only is applicable for online, this is just everywhere in our daily life.
It's funny how we now say, okay, what happens online, it's still human behavior, so we can also apply it offline. While at the beginning of my career, I had to explain the opposite. Say, okay, we do all this offline, but it also works online, really. It's still human behavior.
How things can change really quickly, right?
Exactly. So, the comment that stood out, you just said from Allianz, I read through it in one go. I read a couple of reviews of the Dutch version of the book. I think that was a common review that at least stood out for me, because usually, well, those books are more like a manual and saying, okay, currently I'm struggling with, I don't know, XYZ campaign. Let's go into the book, page 300. Oh, that's about, I don't know, email campaigns. Let's go through that practical steps and then apply it. It doesn't necessarily those books usually you don't start reading at the front and one day later you're at the back, finish the book. That's usually not what happens. So that I think really stands out already. Can you tell us a bit more? How did the first batch go in for the Dutch version of the book?
Yeah, in the Netherlands, we were super pleased with the launch. We were sold out with the first batch on pre-orders. So the demand for the topic was quite high, and it was, of course, great for us. And after our launch, we were 30 days the #1 bestseller on the management book bestseller list. Yeah. So that was really successful launch. We were, of course, really pleased with. And what I even more pleased was, of course, you want to sell the book, but what you really want if you write a book, that you make a difference for somebody. And based on the reviews we got, people were really happy with our book. They could apply it, they could make more success, they could make their clients happier, they could let their business grow. So we got great comments, and that really made us really happy.
Yeah. Do you think the whole pandemic situation did it help your book, or did you see more people have time to read or something? Or
I won't argue I'm pro-COVID, but our topic, yeah, I think it definitely helped us because suddenly everybody was doing things online. Yeah. Big corporates who weren't used to working from distance suddenly had to. So the topic online influence was, I think, it couldn't be hotter than in another time frame than now.
Yeah, exactly. And now an English version. So why are you making an English version? Was it always the intention to do an English version, or?
Yes, it was always our intention, and because my connection with Robert Cialdini, we spoke about it during we were writing the book in Dutch. We already translated it to English, so Cialdini took a look what we are writing, and we collaborate on the book. So it was always the intention to do it in English, but of course, because of the success and the time period where we live now, we speeded up the launch. Yeah. So actually, we launched in April in Holland. So now 6 months later, we already have a complete translation with new examples and ready to launch English version internationally.
Yeah. And as I understood, it's not going to be a quiet launch, right?
I don't hope so. It will be quiet. No, we're going to do everything we can to make this a big celebration for us, but also for everybody who will join us at the webinar for the launch, because we invited Robert Cialdini, and he was actually pleased to join us for the full 1.5 hours. So people get free access to Robert Cialdini, which is quite unusual, of course. Yep. And he is open for questions from the audiences. He will tell a really cool story about himself, what most people don't know. Before he describes his 6 principles and later on the 7th principle of persuasion, he was undercover actually for more than 3 years, and he will set up this undercover story, how he did it and what happened during this time. So I think that's a great story to listen to. Also, he will share his favorite online influence example, and he will share what in his opinion is the best principle from his 7 principles to use online. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the Cialdini part. So he is fully on board, which is great. We will set out the highlights from our book and a minimum of 15 case studies to inspire all the participants for their next marketing campaign. And we want to be out there. So we will be live at the New York Times. We will be in the Economist. We will do a lot of big campaigns. I just was talking to you and I said, we will aim in our social targeting for over 40 million views. So we hope a lot of people will join us for this celebrative moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Cialdini joining, that's already unique. You don't see him online that much, especially not in a free webinar. Do you actually know how much Cialdini works for online companies?
How much time he's been asked to train them, or
Yeah, so I mean,
do some
usually his
consulting?
books and well, his in a cover story, those are mostly based on offline persuasive tactics, right? So
Yeah.
has he been working lately with a lot of online stuff? Do you know?
Yes, I know. Actually, Cialdini is revising his book on influence, and it's asked by his publisher to do a last version and use more online
Okay.
influence examples. And actually, we returned the favor. Reciprocity worked. So we gave him a lot of
Yeah.
examples. So yeah, also there he asked our advice
Nice.
to get as much examples as possible to use in his revised version of influence.
Nice. I would like to know a bit more about the content of the book itself. What can readers expect to learn from it? Assuming, for example, that they already know about, they've already read Cialdini's book, they already know about BJ Fogg's model. So, what's extra in the book besides the practicality? But what are the things that we're going to learn?
Yes, happy to discuss. I'm also happy you brought out this topic because my connection with Cialdini, sometimes people think, oh, they write a book and they put Cialdini's principle in an online code. That's not what we've done. Of course, his principles are named in the book, but not the full 7, only 4. So let me explain what's inside the book. As a foundation, we use the BJ Fogg behavioral model. I don't know if all listeners are familiar with the model, so I will quickly explain it. The model of BJ Fogg explains how behavior comes to life. So he says behavior comes to life when people are in the same time motivated enough to do it. They have the ability, it's easy enough to do it, and there's a prompt at that same moment who asks for the desired behavior. If all these 3 factors are in the right balance, people will do a certain
Yeah,
behavior.
BJ Fogg has this behavioral formula for this, saying these 3 things need to be in place, or at least in a high enough volume. They need to be available before behavior occurs. And we'll get we'll add a link to the show notes if you want to quickly look at the graph for that.
Yeah, that will be great. So that's our basic foundation, and then we make decisions. So we explain that based on Kahneman's research, System 1, System 2. I won't deep dive too much because I think the most of your listeners are familiar with his
hope
work.
So. Yeah. If not, again, no shame there. We'll have links in the show notes explaining those theories too.
Yes, so some show notes, and what we've done, we make choices based on what they call psychology, heuristics, and biases. And we have hundreds of heuristics and biases, which we often see on web pages. Then they say, oh, we have this heuristics and this biases. This is how you can use it online. There are blogs fully written, but it has no structure. So our structure is the Fogg behavioral model, and we took the 37 principles that we know from our own practice are highly successful to upgrade your results. And we put them on these axes. I think the most unique, and I never saw any blog about it, is that we also described prompt techniques. We described several techniques to make the most efficient prompt. So the thing that asks for the behavior, first of all, it needs to get attention. If people don't see your prompt, they will never do the behavior you ask for them.
No, it's really simple. I mean, your website itself, it can be very user-friendly. It can be persuasive as hell. But if no one knows about your website, if they're not prompted to go there, no one's going to buy from you.
Exactly. That's a first simple example. So if they're not prompted to go to your website, you will never get any conversion, of course. And then you have the other side. If you over prompt people,
usually it's the other way
then-
around, right? I mean, when I start doing conversion optimization for a lot of companies, usually the traffic is not the issue. I mean, they're buying a lot of traffic, but then people get stuck on the website. Either there's a lack of ability or lack of motivation. They're prompted, they're on the website, and then they're like, okay, now what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we have made one case that they will hear about in the webinar if they join is, for example, with a small, simple change, how Seat, the car manufacturer, upgraded conversion with 2,000%.
Wow.
Just by thinking on a different prompt strategy. And another lovely case about prompts, which I can explain, it's in Holland, we have bol.com, that's basically our Amazon. And this campaign Joris did, and he won the first CRO award in the Netherlands, the Conversion Rate Optimization Award, by changing their prompts, how to ask for a review, and the number for reviews doubled. So also this case, we will explain how we did, but I think this is a really unique thing in our book because I didn't see blogs somewhere before when we did some research that describes prompt strategies. So that's I think an outstanding part from our book. Then the next one I think is outstanding, that we learn people to do problem solving. If people don't do what we want them to do, whether it's offline or online, we always think they are not motivated enough to do what we want to do. But actually, according to BJ Fogg, and according to our own research, you have to think the other way around. So Fogg's formula is B is MAP, motivation, ability, prompt. But if you do problem solving, you go from prompt, ability to motivation. Prompt we just talked about, but ability is something really interesting because actually you make your desired behavior easier to do, but because it's easier, often your visitors will be much happier with your website. So it works two ways. So that's interesting. And of course, we know how to boost motivation in the moment, just in the moment before making a decision. Only this is the hardest part. And also, there's also not too much written content in an online way that people say, okay, motivation is the hardest part because there's motivational ways. I could wake up and I could be very motivated to work out. And when I see myself in the mirror, I think, Bas, you need to work out more. But the same day, I could sit on a terrace in the sunshine and think, I like a beer and a steak. It's conflicting, but this is how motivation works. So motivation is never on the same level to do something. If something is easy, it always stays easy.
Yeah, and motivation doesn't always to me, the term motivation often seems to mean like, oh, I want to do something, but it doesn't necessarily, in this context, doesn't necessarily have to mean that way, the exact same thing. Because, for example, the example I usually give is filling in your tax papers. Almost no one is motivated to do this, probably, but you are in terms of this formula, you are motivated to do it there, to do it on the website of your local tax institution, because that's the only way. And it also works with if you want to buy a product, maybe you're not necessarily motivated to do it at some place, but if that's the only place you can get this product that you want, you are very motivated in that sense to buy it there, because that's the only option you have.
Absolutely. And the last example is a great example of the scarcity principle, which definitely is in the motivational X. And I like to say this because this is really great stuff, what you're talking about, Guido. And also with tax papers, you're not pretty motivated to do so. But if you don't do it, you can get some penalties or pay more interest. And that's the motivator to start doing it. So... So motivation is great.
The motivation here is not the carrot, but it's a stick.
Yeah,
we're talking about online persuasion and persuading people to change their behavior. You may have heard of The Social Dilemma
Yeah.
on Netflix. So what's your stand in this? I don't know if you've seen it, but you probably know at least what it's about. That there's not necessarily a lot of people that like to be influenced, whether it's online or offline. So what's your stand on this?
I think we're going to talk here about ethics. We also described a chapter about ethical use of these principles in our book. And my stand, if I answer, before I answer your question, I will put a general standpoint of view. You cannot argue, in my opinion, whether these principles are ethical or not, because it's just scientific research that shows how we make choices. I think the outcome and what you do with it is if it's ethical or not.
Yeah.
We describe 6 things in our book where in our opinion, it's a minimal checklist that you need to can answer with yes to say it's ethical. And one of these questions is a basic question. For example, is it true what I say? Would I tell this to my father, mother, brother, or sister?
Yeah.
Another question.
Well, it depends a bit on your relationship with your family, maybe, but
yeah.
But if you have a good relationship, yeah.
yeah. That was the starting point for.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you can say your best friend or your partner. But then you get again what's your relation? Yes.
And any person you have in high regard and you would like to be honest with.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the best framing. Yeah. And of course, is it wise? For example, and wise we mean if this person now does what I ask him to do, would he want to do something for me the next time? The answer is no. Probably you shouldn't do this request.
Yeah.
Now back to your question about the social dilemma. Of course, it's a complicated thing. I think as these companies, we know they really base their strategies on behavioral science, and if the outcome is you make people addictive, and even it goes so further on that people commit suicide, I think you to take your responsibility and do something about it, because this could never be the idea behind the first launch of this app.
Yeah.
The first idea was always to do something good for people. And when it turns from something good because it becomes something bad, I think you have to redesign your ideas.
But you say, okay, these principles that's just based on science, the principles itself are not necessarily good or bad. But you could also say, okay, but we don't necessarily know how human behavior works perfectly. I mean, the things we do know, those are maybe we know 5% of it. I don't know. Maybe it's 80%. I don't know. I don't know what depends on the range, I guess, and the measurement you do. But we don't have a complete picture. I think we can agree on that. We don't have a complete picture on how human behavior works. So isn't it unethical to start with if you want to try to change that if we don't have the full picture?
Yeah, good question, and I think I agree with you. Especially we come to understand more and more of this material, especially with neuroscience now. Of course, they really see what parts of the brain light up and which parts doesn't. So we see more and more interesting research. But yeah, I agree with you but the ethical part is always some gray area. I think for some person thinks this is still ethical, and another person could argue this is totally unethical already. But that's
also an interesting one, right? Indeed, it depends on your perspective. If you think if it's ethical or not, so that's already making it a very difficult discussion. And another thing to add, I always say when people tell me, oh, but it's not nice to be to apply persuasion or something, but it's impossible not to do. To apply persuasion. You always try to persuade something. The person telling me this is trying to persuade me to change my behavior. So in the way you clothe yourself, the way you look, the way you dress, the way you communicate, anything, it's all persuasion.
I completely agree. I often argue, indeed, that almost any conversation we have, there is some goal about this conversation.
Yeah,
For
right. We're
one of
trying to
those,
get people to buy a book now
yeah,
and to
yeah,
go
yeah,
to
yeah.
your webinar.
Not
It's
to
all
join
about
our
persuasion.
webinar, we don't
Exactly.
want to take their money yet.
No, it's just a free webinar. No, but
Yeah.
but that's the whole point, right? It's not necessarily there's no non-persuasive communication. I mean that's going to be really hard not to include any persuasion in there. So. Especially doing this research online, and your book is a good example of that. In trying to understand those impacts that we do, I think is way more important than just trying to ignore it and then just do whatever. I think that's way more riskier, right? And then you try to influence behavior, and you don't base it on any research that can have way more bigger adverse effects than if you don't take those into account.
Completely agree. And even I dare to argue that also the person that we want to persuade, if you tell honest information, the receiver of this information will be happy with this information. When I book a hotel and the number of reviews and the reviews are true, I'm happy that I can read them because I can make a better choice. If I want to go to a super nice restaurant and I know this is the last table that I can reserve for this time and this date, and I know this, I'm really happy that I know it. It's often scarcity is often used in a false way. But when it's true scarcity, I want to know this because I can make a better choice myself as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Can I still buy this TV or not? I want to know if it's truly the last one and I really want it.
So it also helps people to make better choices, and that's the ethical part. And then it's what, like we said, it's a gray area. But we in our book we describe this and we give 6 questions as a guideline to the reader.
Yeah.
And I think these 6 basic guidelines should help people to get win-win situations. And as long as that's your goal, your client is happy and you can make money or you have a better reputation, or what the outcome for the company or for the other person is, as long as it stays win-win, these principles work for everybody.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the biggest issue that people have with it is maybe even when it's win-win, the win for the other party might be much bigger, and if that's clear, that's fine. But if that's not obvious, if people are kept in the dark about what the actual motivations of the other party are, if that's obscured, maybe intentionally so, then that's where people find themselves betrayed.
Exactly. And then again, we go back to this question already mentioned. Is this wise to present it like this? Because you intentionally are setting up a deal when somebody finds out later that he starts hating you. Probably the answer to the question, is it wise to do, should be no. And then we advise people, go back and redesign your offer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, probably if you want to figure out that, I was reading this article about how to handle this with kids when they're persuaded into showing this repeat behavior, like hanging on TikTok for hours. I'm talking about kids, but my girlfriend is doing the same. But but it helps to take a person out of that conversation, out of that behavior, and then ask them, okay, what do you want to achieve, like this year or with school? Do you want to succeed in school? Yes, I want to succeed. Okay, but then you need to do your homework, or you need to study for something. Yeah, I need to study. But does it help achieving that goal if you're on TikTok for hours? No, no, it doesn't. So, and then you see, and you can do this, of course, also with the clients that you have, to figure out, are we actually helping them or not? If you take them out of this behavior, and would they still actively choose to do so? Do you think that it helps them in that way? And I think that probably has a way bigger effect on the long term for your long-term success as a company, if you actually provide that long-term value, than when it's only short-term effects. But I think that a big problem there with a lot of companies, and I think with Facebook and TikTok and well, of course, those are the famous ones. But I think that's almost at any company that the incentives that we all see as employees at a company, those are often short-term incentives, right?
I completely agree. That's also human behavior again.
Yeah.
Only I know from a true fact, if you have a longer run and it's already, if you take something for a year and not only tomorrow, a year is pretty sure you can you can bring outstandingly more success for your company than you only think what will happen tomorrow. Let's argue, and then a year is quite short. I want to add something, Guido, because it just pops up in my mind. You mentioned these big companies, Facebook, TikTok, we know the Netflix, Amazon. And often people think, this material is only for them. They have the budgets, they can hire all these smart people, and they have these big teams. And actually, I want to say to all the listeners, that's not true. Because in our book, we describe such simple changes that is sometimes even costly, and otherwise it's at a really small budget with huge outcome. From Cialdini, he names it a small big, so a small change, big outcome. And actually, this is what I like to share with the listeners. Everybody who understands this material can upgrade their success, whether you have a big budget or a small budget.
How? Tell us how, Bas.
It just pops up, but
but there are a lot of practical examples, right, in the book. So you can apply this. And is it also meant as like a guidebook? I mean, we already discussed. People are just reading through the whole book. Can I also is it also like meant to be on my desk the whole time? And I'm currently designing this. Let's go to the book. Is it?
Yeah, great question, Guido. Thanks for asking it, because the answer is clearly yes. We want to write a book that you can have on your desk, and this is how we build. We go from these axes, just like we talked about. Then we have a chapter about choice architecture, and then probably the last 30% of the book is only practical application. So you can go to a chapter how to design an email advertisement, how to design a display ad, or how to design a landing page or a checkout page, and you get advice. And completely at the end of the book, we have a checklist. Did I check all these questions? And we have a list with ideation prompts. So ask yourself these questions to inspire yourself to make your next campaign better. So definitely, yes, a book, what we would like that you put on your desk and use it on a daily basis.
Okay, cool. My final question on the book itself. I assume there's no section on buying behavior during pandemics. But if you would add a chapter on that specific topic for businesses preparing maybe for the upcoming holiday season during this pandemic, what would you write for them? What would you advise them?
During a pandemic, that's a good question. What would I advise? Of course, it's a little bit different advice to the industry you are, because at the moment, if you are a restaurant or a travel agency, I will give you a different advice than probably the industry where I came from, the kitchen industry, because this industry is growing rapidly, actually, because everybody is at home. So different advice. I would certainly advise them a way of persuasion to have the right communication with their employees and their clients, and make the ability, also focus there on the ability, make the ability to stay in touch and to let your clients approach you and let your people approach your clients, design this. And also an ability, but I think most companies already done, make sure your employees who work now from home have a good ability to do their work from home. That's probably the best advice I can give at the moment to a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Because
and especially now that things seem to take on a bit longer than we may have expected in the beginning. You can say, okay, for 3 months we can all make it work, but if it takes a long time, then frustrations might rise, and things get. You get frustrated with things faster, maybe, now that you're working from a distance. Maybe it can be the discussion itself, it can also be the chair you're sitting on.
Exactly. But those are things that increase the ability, because in the beginning you can boost yourself, so you are motivated to all day sit in your home office. But now it's running for months, and I think still I hear people talking, I doubt whether are people working as hard from home. And then again, they go back to the motivational impact. Make the ability for your employees to work from home really high, and they will see better results. That will be a behavior design advice that I will give them during this pandemic.
Cool. So the webinar will be on the 28th, right? October 28th. Yeah. Where do people go to subscribe?
It's on October 28th, 7 p.m. Amsterdam time. That means 1 p.m. New York time. Mm-hmm. They go to onlineinfluence.com/webinar.
And again, it's free, right?
It's free, 100% free, no strings attached, and you get full access to a lot of business cases, to Robert Cialdini. We will do an online influence quiz. If you win this quiz, you get to answer your personal question to Dr. Cialdini himself. So it will be a lot of celebration moments.
My suggestion for the question will be, what's persuasion principle number 8?
I will keep this one in mind for you.
Bas, thank you so much. If people already think, hey, maybe this book is something for me and I already want to buy the book, where do they go?
Go also to onlineinfluence.com/book, or just go to onlineinfluence.com and see in the navigation the book button.
Links. Perfect. And we'll also have these links, of course, to the show notes of this podcast. One of my final questions for you, Bas. What is an insight, maybe also created or during the process of writing this book? What's an insight that you think you may have that you think others in or outside Zero may not have?
I already told it one time during this podcast, but I think a big insight should be people don't do what you want them to do. Don't first start to boost motivation. First, check your prompts, then check, can we make it easier for the visitor to do? And as last, think on motivation.
Yeah, so first you need to figure out where they're actually getting stuck.
Yes.
And not necessarily where, but also why. Where and why are they
something in the moment that we want a person to do a certain behavior? Is there a prompt that asks for this behavior?
Yeah.
And often, if you ask that basic question, and then the second question is this the best prompt strategy? If you ask those two questions, you can already often increase conversions and quite easily and cost effectively.
Yeah. And thank you for that, Bas. And my final question for you, I have a feeling who you're going to suggest, but who should I invite for the upcoming an upcoming Zero Cafe episodes, and what should I ask them?
That's an easy one, of course, Guido. That will be Robert Cialdini, and you have to ask him about his 8 principles.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, actually, Bas, I've heard you are very well trained in persuasive principles, so I assume you will be able to persuade him to come on the podcast.
I'm going definitely ask it for you.
Thank you, Bas. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. We'll definitely check it out. We'll subscribe to the webinar. I hope to see you there, and maybe we'll figure out what the 8th principle is going to be.
That will be great. Thank you for being here, Guido. It was lovely again speaking with you.
Talk to you soon, Bas. Bye bye.